for joining us. I'm Annalisa Montenegro, the Director of Marketing at Microsol Resources, and we have a great presentation and discussion for you. It's actually the spotlight on the latest innovations in construction and design. A few weeks ago, we actually had started our online conference series about leveraging digital twin technology. And today we are continuing that conversation again on part 2 of our conversation. Today, we're actually excited to hear from Sala Palos-Eckhart from Microsoft joining us, as well as Bill Kwan from CallisonRTKL, Sarah Dreger from Stantec, and of course, Steve Jones from Dodge Data and Analytics.
Thank you, Annalisa. Part of what I do here at Dodge and running our Insights research group is we study all the trends that are taking place across the industry. We study all kinds of technology trends, sustainability, risk management, safety management, practice advances, all the things that are going on. We're trying to bring some quantitative analysis to what these trends are, because this is the biggest industry on the planet Earth. I mean, it dwarfs, except in the United States where healthcare is bigger, but it dwarfs every other industry everywhere. I mean, if aliens came from outer space and needed to report back to the mothership about what these carbon-based bipeds do all day, dude, they just knock stuff down and put more stuff up. That's all they care about. But it is incredibly fragmented. I mean, I know I used to run a major firm in a big city, and I thought I knew about the industry, but if the project across the street, if we weren't on it, and it was the most innovative project on the planet at the time, I would have no idea. All right, we tend to know what's right in front of us, what we're dealing with, maybe what some of our colleagues are dealing with. So what we try and do at Dodge is go out and survey broad global audiences and find out what's really happening with, fill in the blank, whatever it is, what things are actually bringing some true, scalable, measurable, repeatable kinds of benefits. What do you have to do in order to achieve those? What's hard about it? Right? As opposed to thinking everything's easy, it's not, right? Some of these things are difficult. In many cases, it boils down to kind of a common fact that maybe it's 10% technology, 90% sociology, right? And actually getting people to adopt and embrace change and behave in different ways. So part of what we've been looking at over the last few years, especially along with our BIM studies, of which we've done about 20 smart market reports on BIM now, is what's the owner's role in this? A few of the agencies in the United States came out early, like the GSA, the Department of Defense. A couple of municipalities came out fairly early and began mandating it to solve specific problems. It hasn't really necessarily engaged heavily across the entire owner community. There are some standards being developed now at a national level, finally, which may give owners more of an ability to control the use of, and therefore their deliverable at the end. But there's been this growing term that we've all been hearing a lot about now called the digital twin, the theory of which is obvious and brilliant. Wouldn't it be terrific if an owner, instead of getting a giant pile of drawings and a bunch of booklets about how they're supposed to run their facility that gets stuck in some basement room that gets water dripped on it, wouldn't it be great if they had everything virtual, such as many of us are now working with during design, during construction, during fabrication? Wouldn't that be wonderful just to flow it directly into the waiting arms of the owner to say, take this digital asset and now connect it perhaps even with some sensors that you've got real live, feeding you information, keeping that thing digitally nimble and alive through its entire useful life, and connect it to others, and we get smart cities, and all this makes such enormous sense. But again, we're in relatively early days of actually getting there, right? Unfortunately, contracts are in the way in many cases. They still call for, give me the drawings, okay? It's just the reality. Lots of things have got to get changed. We're really fortunate today that we've got 3 folks to help us understand where we are with this and what some of the things that we can literally physically start doing tomorrow that might help all of us move towards that. We have the owner perspective, a couple of design professionals' perspectives who are actually now deeply engaged in truly doing this, right? So I'm going to turn this over initially now to Sala from Microsoft, who's going to give us a bit more of that owner perspective about what should owners be asking for, how can owners be using this, what's valuable to owners, how do you all make that work when you have the power and control that an owner could and should have. Sala?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Annalisa, for inviting us again here. It's good to see you, Bill and Sarah, and talk about digital twins again, round two. I have a slide that I'm going to use to talk about the owner's perspective into digital twins. So I figured that I'll be brave enough and just use one image to kind of tell the story from this end. So oftentimes when thinking about the AECO industry, I'm attaching the owner organizations into the construction side of industry already, and wanted to add also the manufacturing, so calling it ACOM industry from now on, or the built environment industry, to be very inclusive. But thinking about, like Stephen said, the industry traditionally is very fragmented. People are obligated to deliver the 2D drawings and basically paper documents, regardless of are they in PDF format or printed paper. The outcomes are the same as they have been for decades or hundreds of years. But with the emerging technology of digital twins, and it's not only a technology, it's a methodology and a new way of working, we can start looking into how do we actually bridge ourselves with our colleagues, with the other stakeholders that are involved with the same project as we are, and start breaking down the traditional silos. Help and support the knowledge transfer between colleagues and between project teams, between different organizations and companies. Because when thinking about the built environment industry altogether, there isn't much that everyone doesn't know. We're dealing with an industry that has existed for so long that we have the tribal knowledge or the common knowledge of what is expected, or how things are delivered, how they are designed, how they are engineered, how they are built. And the differentiator today is that who or which companies are capable of providing the digital services for each other or for the investor, developer, owner organizations. And I chose this picture on purpose to make the digital twins more tangible. So if thinking about how we are traditionally managing data and information in different files and different folders and different documents, with the digital twin, the idea is that we actually start to democratize the data so that it can be refined into information that is relevant for a specific stakeholder, organization, or team, so that they can make better decisions or give better guidance for those that are decision makers. The digital twin should be a steering tool. It should be a common collaboration platform tool. It should be a decision-making tool. It should be the tool that we first digitally build everything, simulate and analyze it, and they then make the decision to go forward and create something physical. And in this illustration, we have a group of 4 people looking at a smart grid system. And what makes this a really good image is that a digital twin is not a building information model. So that seems to be something that needs to be set straight with the built environment industry, that digital twin is not BIM, as BIM is not necessarily CAD, or BIM is CAD, but CAD is not necessarily BIM. So we're not changing verbiage for the industry to make something that already exists look new again. But digital twins go much beyond what the traditional tools have been, and it is more of a federation platform for really connecting and federating the different data sources and information sources into the digital truth that is then consumable for both machines but also for human beings. So instead of trying to flip through pages and try to explain what is happening in the built environment, we can take a look at the phenomena and the cause and effect of that phenomena with the digital twin. And that way, you're not only limiting yourself for reviewing the drawings of the smart grid, if you're interested in the technical performance of the turbines that we are looking at here, and limiting your decision making into what is happening in an individual turbine or component of it. But you can really scale. You can scale from that individual product or the system into the entire infrastructure, the entire digital grid, the smart grid, and then also bring in some of the surroundings to explain why there is a certain phenomena happening, what is causing it, and what is it going to lead into, so that when you're detecting that there is an actual issue in your built environment, if in this case it's the smart grid, you're not only limiting your point of view into the individual component, the turbine 2 in this case, but you can really review that how is the surrounding environment, the natural environment, actually influencing and impacting the built environment. And then if you have an issue there, how can you prevent that from becoming a problem? And when looking at the project in front of you, it seems to me that this is a legacy project that the team is looking at. So they're not necessarily the original engineering or design team or the contractor team, but they are the owners and operators of this infrastructure. So they don't know exactly how the project was designed originally, how it was planned, what were the anticipated performance requirements from the owner of the smart grid. They're dealing with something that is happening right now, and they need to be able to resolve it as fast as possible, because if this smart grid goes down, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's not going to cost a lot of money for the owner of the grid. It's going to cost a lot of money for those that are using the grid. So there is that accumulative phenomena happening that it just grows and grows as far as you want to go and see what the impact is. You can really consolidate the data into information that is relevant. So you're not only limited into reviewing the 3D model, that would be basically the BIM traditionally in our own industry, but you can also integrate the building information model where the business intelligence dashboard that you're seeing that the person on the left is digitally touching and tapping into more information about a specific metric, and that way being able to communicate even better to the team that what is their recommendation of going forward. And when thinking about how many people are being included in the meeting and how inclusive the consumption of digital twin is, it's really a game changer. You're no longer just relying on people's own verbiage and terminology that they're using trying to communicate to you what is their recommendation that what we should do. You're looking at the same 3D model, looking at the same business intelligence dashboard, looking at the same data, but then refining that data into information that is relevant for your storytelling and your recommendations of what is the best approach forward. And that way, when communicating with the rest of the project team, you can really find that balanced solution going forward. Maybe optioneer what might be a feasible option to repair something or rebalance the system, and that way avoid issues from becoming problems, or resolving something that then down the line will create additional issues or problems. So overall, the digital twin is a collaboration platform, and it's also democratizing the data that is being shared across the project teams and made available. And since the digital twins are a cloud-based platform or cloud-based service, you're always dealing with the latest and the greatest information and data that is available. And that way, when making decisions of how to move forward, what to do, what might be the required maintenance or repair functions, you're basing it based on the data and the evidence that is presented to you. So no longer do you have to be second guessing necessarily that are you dealing with something that is actually the digital truth? Can you rely on your colleagues that are trying to resolve the issue at hand? But you can really arrive at confident decision making much earlier on and much faster than you could using 2D drawings.
I'm Bill Kwan. I'm the Vice President of Digital and Information Technology at CallisonRTKL. This topic around digital twin is something that's been very, very close to us for a number of years. When we started our own business transformation and understanding how important a role that digital twin will be, and it's supplanting the idea that BIM is the game changer, right? And so we talked a little bit about this in our last presentation. I'll kind of quickly go over these first couple of slides. Within CallisonRTKL and our parent organization, Arcadis, that we have a framework in which we kind of understand the idea and the concepts around digital twins, right? And so because it's a spectrum, there is a kind of common understanding that a digital twin is this massive, really complicated, very difficult to achieve, data rich and data mature and data sophisticated concept that can be really, really terrifying, right? If you're just getting started, or if you're maybe not a big 30,000 person conglomerate, those kinds of things. But it really isn't quite that difficult. And I think to Steve's earlier point, the rest of the world, I mean, we talk a lot about it. We talk a good game around the maturity of these things, but but there's still a great deal of work to be done. We sort of characterize this where a lot of the BIM that's being done these days kind of falls into this category around digital twin ready, like this what we call level 0, and it means that you have some sort of mechanism that aggregates both geometric information and data, as well as element attribute data, parametric data, those kinds of things that sort of inform what the purpose and the design is. It's not necessarily just a sort of a 3D representation of the physicalness of the asset, but what the physicalness actually does and how it functions within the ultimate design. When we talk about like the next level around informational twin is where we can start connecting sort of static sets of information and data, whether it's a legacy performance data that's been captured around energy performance, those kinds of things, or it could be about building performance and analysis data that come from weather reports, legacy annualized weather reports, those kinds of things. You feed that in, and it starts driving the digital model, but as well starts providing avenues for decision making, right? That's based on that data. Once we get to sort of a greater level of maturity and sophistication, then we can kind of get to this operational twin, which is where you're actually hooking up sort of live sensors and other ways of capturing real-time information and data about the asset, and that it reports bidirectionally, right? So that the sensor is giving back information, the digital twin is giving feedback back to some centralized data visualization component. And then the ultimate goal, right, the dream scenario is that idea of sort of a smart city and a smart connected world where multiple digital twins are connecting to each other, and then both driving sort of insight, but providing information, or like real-time information about performance and monitoring and those kinds of things, and being able to be predictive, right, about to manage not only water treatment system within a city, but how buildings interact with those kinds of things and electrical grids, and so that we look at the idea of a digital twin as really more comprehensive. Next slide, please. And so for us, we look at, there is a sort of connection, right, between this physical twin and a virtual twin that is represented in sort of this infinite loop. And there are a number of things around the physical twin, around its owner operation and facilities management, that is sort of the most logical thing that we understand around digital twin. Which part of the building is performing well, what part needs maintenance, what part of the building or the system has failed and requires replacement. And then, but from a design perspective, and the perspective that digital twin is really important for us, is on this virtual end, and it is about sort of both monitoring and capturing the performance of the building from a human experience perspective. So not just around the comfort level and the total number, the amount of daylighting that you get within an internal space, but also how people are actually using the spaces, and what spaces as were designed or predicted are actually being used in the way that we set out originally thinking. And that can be around just the which corridors are most likely used, is in fact the shortest path, the one that's most widely used. But it also, so not only are we monitoring those kinds of things, but being able to aggregate that data from a design and a solutioning perspective gives us the ability to then either carry forward the insight that we've gleaned to future designs for different projects and different buildings, but as well to continue to improve the building that's already been monitored and censored up. And so that information, a lot of that is always changing. And there are a number of different ways to record and capture and that kind of information and data. A lot of it is the common sort of IoT, the physicalness, the physical connection between that. But performance alone isn't the criteria that we see the value in digital twin. Sala also mentioned that this idea of really like a new way of thinking around digital twin is the sort of common data environment. And we believe wholeheartedly in that there are different ways that that we as an industry collaborate in terms of whether it's BIM 360 or project-wise, whatever happens to be that you happen to use as a CDE. The main part that's important though is being able to do something with it, right? And so whatever your common data environment happens to be, it can be super sophisticated, it can be something that you get as infrastructure or platform as a service. Whatever it happens to be is just to understand that ultimately you want to be able to drive those kinds of insights and create knowledge and wisdom from that. Next slide, please. So the biggest, I think, challenge that we have across the industry, really kind of focusing on that idea of fragmentation, is that there's only a handful of really big firms that perhaps have more money to invest in a really ambitious solution. It can be difficult for smaller firms to sort of make that investment, and if they do, they really have to understand what the value is, right? And so, other than just doing it to keep up with the Joneses and doing it for a data aggregation's sake, and so that can be really difficult, right? And even, I mean, we're CallisonRTKL right now is 1,100 people, and our Arcadis is about 28,000, and there's still considerations, right? And so where we have been successful with digital twin have been in really focused and targeted areas, right? And so from an engineering perspective, Arcadis has been very successful with water treatment and water infrastructure, and building out digital twin and utilizing a variety of different platform technologies to feed that. For us, right now, because of the state of the industry, we have some instances where owners have maybe a more forward-thinking or sophisticated approach to how they want to run their facilities management, and we do have dedicated teams that help solution those things out for our clients. But by and large, nobody is talking about a completely 100% censored up building that they can move on all of these aspects next year. And I read an interesting stat from Gartner that prior to COVID, they were saying that 50% of all buildings in North America would be censored up, and those constraints. I sort of I'm not sure if how reliable that information is right now, but we just still recognize that there's a lot of work to do. But to make it sort of less kind of terrifying or intimidating about getting started, I just wanted to share a little bit with you about like our approach and how we got started, and then give you a couple of examples of how we're utilizing this idea of digital twin. And so Sal is 100% right about that, the idea that BIM is not digital twin. And we have to really kind of understand that. And even the way that we approach BIM and the things that we include in our BIM is different than the requirements needed to really have a sharper view through digital twin. So it's important to sort of set those expectations and understand that. But there's like the way that I sort of look at things right now is that there's these two approaches to how we think about digital twin conceptually. The first is that like monster idea in the comprehensive model, that it is geared up, it's kitted up, it's fixed to go. We have the mechanisms to capture all the information. We have tools and processes to analyze that and provide insight and be predictive and all those things. And again, that's just an area that's really difficult to achieve, especially now. It has a huge investment cost. It has a huge technical effort, right? The skill sets, the discipline for your data, and the framework that it exists in is really high. And frankly, most organizations, both on the AEC side and the owner side, are not as sophisticated as they need to be to get to this level of digital twin. And that's okay, right? Because we're starting out, but it's important to recognize that as you get started in understanding what data you can leverage, there's a lot of parts of this that simply aren't going to be possible because of the data maturity level of the organization itself. And then from building perspective, the needs and the demands and the sort of insight that you can drive really varies across the different typologies, across the different project sectors. So you need to be able to understand that. And then potentially on the upside is that you get to that sort of digital twin level 3, where you have a sophisticated enough digital twin that can interact with other sophisticated digital twins, and that's where you get sort of to the promised land of that ecosystem. The way that we look at things, though, especially from a purely architecture perspective, is to really understand a more selective approach to the fidelity of that digital twin. It's not necessary to censor up the building completely if you just want to understand envelope performance, for instance. Or from a human perspective, if you just want to understand, are the team spaces, are the meeting spaces really being utilized as much as predicted? And if they are underutilized, why? And what we can do with that additional space, or really more conversely, right, is that even when we predict that we're going to need more meeting space or team spaces, we don't seem to have enough of that. That seems to be more our case. In any event, that's just an example of how you can really focus how you're censoring, how you're monitoring, how you're creating a digital twin that is focused on a specific design criteria. The nice thing about it is it's easy, right? It's a low investment. The technical barrier is a lot lighter from your own teams about being skilled in handling the modeling and understanding the data. And as well, it provides, you can get a smaller subset of data, performance data from the owner that is more fixed on targeting these kinds of solutions. I think from a potential perspective, the nice thing about this is, like all things, getting started, the sort of low-hanging fruit paradigm, it's like you're setting, not only are you building your capabilities and expertise, but you're also providing an actual financial pathway and a data strategy pathway to get to that maturity without having to be sort of overwhelmed by the concept of a comprehensive model. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we did is that we just started. So we started this a couple years ago, and we just started it internally. Next slide, please, Anna. Yeah, thank you. And so we thought about, okay, well, what can we do, just to understand, like, what kind of data do we have? How are people working? We're an Autodesk Revit house, so we had that, but we had other challenges, right? Because we still have other people using Rhino Grasshopper. We have some people using SketchUp. How do we consolidate all this information into something, all this data that's being authored into something that's usable? So we thought it was helpful to sort of start with okay, what is it that we want to do, right? We want to have a digital twin that doesn't just report performance data, right? We wanted a digital twin that was going to allow us to start understanding and capturing and validating human use of the space, right? So are people comfortable? What is that? What's the relationship with wellness and satisfaction and those kinds of things? What are the functional parameters, right? The operational parameters, like how many people go to the coffee room at 10 a.m. Those kinds of things. So the first thing we did, we just thought about okay, what is the simplest things, right? And we say, okay, there's sensors, and sensors can be an actual a data gathering reporting mechanism in its most pragmatic form, but there's other ways that you can capture information. So the sensor itself is just like, what is the input? And then we understand the sort of necessary bits that you get is, so you have a number of inputs coming in. So there needs to be some sort of layer that sort of takes all that in. And that layer starts feeding in what is this abstract idea of a digital twin. right? And so that could be one department in a building, it could be the whole building, it could be individual rooms within a building. Depends on your sophistication and your ambition and what your bandwidth allows. And then, so once you have that, and then there is everything about digital twin, there's a temporal element, right? So as data comes in and updates the performance, you need to be able to capture that. So there's another layer that is involved in understanding that and timestamping all the information and data so you can properly analyze that. And then there's from there we kind of split into these different pathways in total usage, right? So like there is an events hub that understands, you know, what are the activities that we're trying to monitor that are going to set up analytics kind of parameters about the model itself. And as we go, we can determine, say, oh, okay, well, we can sort of pipe that out and build a Forge, use Forge, the Forge API to make that connection, create feedback loop back and forth with the Revit model, those kinds of things. But there's other solutions that we were interested in, right? And so there's a lot of work being done around gaming engines, both with Unity and the Unreal Engine. And so there are different sort of techniques and technologies that you can use to navigate the two and reconcile that. Spatial flow is one of the ways that you can take that data twin, digital twin model back and forth within the Unreal environment. And then sort of the third and simplest thing is like, you know, what is the spatial model? If we're talking like, did we want to do a separate type of model that is focused only on human experience? What are the different kind of drivers and data inputs and outputs that are going to be required to do those kinds of things? Next slide, please, Anna. So how that looked for us is that we didn't try to approach this like, okay, we're just going to wait till we get a client that's going to buy into our narrative and trust us enough to do this. We just sort of experimented on ourselves, right? So we had we have a global technology studio that provides technologies for buildings, things like security cameras and elevator monitoring systems, those kinds of things. And they formed a relationship with, or they have a relationship with a number of IoT partners. And so what we decided to do for ourselves is start censoring up our own offices and start building out sort of these digital spaces within some of our CallisonRTKL offices, just so that we could start monitoring the information. The great thing about it is, you know, we have Revit information for all of that. We have data attribute information because around the materials and the furniture systems and those kinds of things, because we do all of our own design work. Interestingly, we did see as a result of this kind of how sloppy some of our Revit work was back in the day. So it gave us the opportunity to understand, hey, you know, these are the parts of the framework that we really need in order to pass all this information back and forth. So we use a combination of sensors, IoT sensors that we've got from manufacturers. But we had a pretty innovative and passionate team, and so they actually built their own sensors using Raspberry Pis and Arduino boards. And so the idea is that we would take this, build a hierarchy and a taxonomy of the types of data that were going to be important for us, just in this little experiment. And then it gave us the opportunity to build sort of all the different pieces that we needed on the back end of things, and so which is now informing us about our own platform approach about how we're going to be delivering as advanced services the kind of digital twin aggregation and the analytics that comes along with that. Next slide, please. So one of the examples that we have was like this idea of using the Unreal Engine, and so. I'm sorry, in this case, it was a Unity engine. And so it was about, in our case, building out the project three-dimensionally, carrying certain attribute data and all those kinds of things. But we were focused on the human experience part. And so this is an area that actually didn't require a sensor to capture data. We were actually relying on human experience through the gaming engine itself, right? So this was a larger project, something that we were doing in the Middle East, and we were testing how people were reacting to certain spaces and architectural elements. And so what you're seeing in terms of the lines and dots are things that people focused on, all the different people that tried out the system, where they went, how quickly they moved towards something, if they responded to it positively or negatively. And that's one of the things that I wanted to express, right, and reinforce is the idea that that, you know, especially in these early days, the data that informs digital twin and what you get out of it isn't going to be just a sensor that reads how warm a room is or what the airflow is. Those are critical pieces for sure when it comes to the building performance. But how human beings actually use the buildings is ultimately going to be really important, both from a financial perspective from the owners, but also from a sustainability perspective with the overall project and its impact on the environment. Next slide, please. The last thing is a little video again that we had just been experimenting from a simulation perspective. So from a digital twin perspective, if we're talking not only just about the performance data of the envelope or the mechanical conditions of how the building performs, but again also sort of focusing on this idea that we use the digital twin to both understand through data capture how spaces are being used, but also from a design perspective purely is to make sure that we're understanding how the function of the building is being predicted and how that aligns with actual use. And simulation isn't a new idea, and it's certainly not the only thing that's driving a digital twin. What we're trying to do, or what we're working towards, is aligning those ideas from a purely design perspective as input. So similar to the previous slide that we're using in an isolated way in that gaming engine to be able to like understand, oh well, you know, this one tower everybody seemed to ignore, so maybe that's not as important, and if not, let's understand why. It's just sort of a way to solve certain things. Within this tool, though, the simulation tool itself requires inputs, right? So the movement of all the different agents is predicated on different kinds of data that we provide, right? So it was there was data around how fast did they move, what department they work in, how many times they meet in a meeting area. If it's a big meeting, how many people need to go through that. We introduced this idea of influencers, right? So it's sort of born from the idea in a early COVID days work around, like, okay, if you have a single person that's been infected with somebody, how does that actually look visually as they move through a space? What we understand now is on the back of building out these tools and doing additional research is that there's actually a different kind of provocative solution that we're looking at things around. That idea of influence isn't just about like a viral spread, but also about an idea and about how people, especially within the design field, a highly creative field, how we can sort of model out spaces that truly promote that idea of the interchange of ideas and those kinds of things through physical proximity. So overall, that's a lot to take in. I just wanted to encourage everyone that like you can start as big or as small as you'd like to, and as you're able to, and even if you have the biggest ambitions of the world, which we do, right? We started really small, and it was really easy. And I just know this: if we can do it, everyone else can do it. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who's going to give you some greater insight on the kind of considerations that you need to have as you're getting started.
Before Sarah starts, Bill, interesting questions come in for you. You already touched on the fact that you've got a bunch of folks actually building your own sensors. which is maybe above the skill level of your average attendee here. So the question came in about, in terms of what you can get at what used to be Radio Shack, what kinds of sensor devices usually monitor and transfer the building performance data? And are there any brands or types of equipment that are usually specified for actual monitoring of building performance and things of that nature? I love the human aspect of this, though. That is so cool. I really want to get into that later. But anyway, help some people who basically want to just go out to Best Buy and get homes.
So sure. Even so let me just say again, we didn't start out thinking that we were going to just DIY it like 100%. It just sort of came on the back of we had these people that were just really interested in this, and we only had like one person in our entire company that actually had experience doing that. But the small group of people that we got sort of interested in this first initiative, they all kind of wanted to do it themselves. And so I would say, even if people on this call don't necessarily have the domain expertise to do that, I would bet real money that somebody in your organization actually does, and they've got the passion and the drive and the will to do that. And so I would definitely encourage you to try to suss that out, tease that out, surface that, and support it, right? Because whether or not you actually go with a sensor for that you built yourself as a solution, it's really not important. The important is that you're getting these people really thinking about these things in creative ways, and that's where kind of the magic happens, right?
But are there some brands that you did work with? Yeah, I'm just throw out a few names for our friends here.
Yeah, for sure. So Schneider Electric has a huge IoT platform, as does Siemens and Philips. And then also there are players. So they are major players in this space. They have their own IoT platform. So that sensor hub, that first layer where you need to aggregate all these things. They have these platforms already, so it's not necessarily you don't need to build things out, and all of their platforms have APIs. So even let's say if you buy some of these, let's say room temperature and humidity sensors from Siemens, but you buy envelope, daylight, and energy usage from Schneider. There's still a way to connect all that information. So those are sort of the common big players. I would say this though, that there is no brand, like when it comes to like do it yourself, it's literally just they're like, we bought all of our stuff on Amazon, and it's literally just a Raspberry Pi, just a little kind of computer. And then that computer has little inputs that you connect, a camera to it, or some sort of temperature, humidity, barometric measurement tool. It's actually not that difficult. But yes, to your point, Steve, there's plenty of available sources for much more sophisticated tools.
All right, hashtag Raspberry Pi.
Yeah,
Sarah, take it away.
Well, thank you. So as a result of our conversation last month, my colleagues and I thought it might be of value to share some of what my team and I have learned as well along our digital twin journey. Next slide, please. Bear with me, allergy season is a doozy. So most of our clients are looking for some combination of the functionality denoted here. In essence, most merely want to understand and have a better way to organize, retrieve, manage, and then leverage the data that they've been amassing for a long time. At face value, this seems pretty straightforward and simple enough. But while this may seem daunting to some of you, and I know this isn't necessarily going to help you immediately, it's not necessarily the easiest thing. Next, please. And why? Why is that? Well, there are overwhelming number of possibilities and ways in which data, once curated, can be leveraged. And most of us, firms, individuals, it doesn't really matter, are struggling with managing and wrangling the sheer amount of data and content that we amass and produce on a nearly daily basis. Not to mention, most of our clients have been working with various practitioners like ourselves and providers over the years, and we all have varying standards, leverage totally different platforms or solutions in the pursuit and delivery of design. And of course, as Bill already alluded to and solided somewhat as well, there's the time-old challenge of as-builts, record drawings, and the occasional variance between design intent and construction that are captured in varying degrees of accuracy. Next. So my role, or our roles, are really to work with clients to understand what they need in addition to what they want, and to work with them to then build that plan for success, right? The best way we found to do that, really, to understand who all of the actual players and stakeholders are, because it's usually not the first group that we meet with, is to have a series of workshops to establish what that baseline functionality is that's required, and then take that as an opportunity for both of us, both client and for us as the partner, to really understand what should be included and make sure that all of the critical stakeholders are engaged in the process. And there are many, 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 many. Next. So as we go through the workshop planning process, we're able to ask and answer a number of very, very critical questions. I've included a few here, just for those who are beginning to embark on the journey, but I could sum it up by saying that just you have to plan with the end in mind and understand that trying to leverage data, especially to this magnitude and depending on the circumstances that you or your client are operating in, can be a journey, one that you don't necessarily like eat the elephant all at once, if you will. First, understanding what the current infrastructure environment is. And what I mean by that is Azure, AWS, hybrid, on-prem, any existing IoT, or other solutions that require consideration and inclusion. Many of us are heavily invested in a number of different vendor products. They become ingrained as part of our practice. But more importantly, too, on the flip side, from the owner perspective, you've already been working with a number of different partners. So who all needs to be included in that discussion? What points of data is it that you're looking for? Next, understanding the existing security posture. Depending on the extent of the scope and distribution of your client operations, you need to not only consider current requirements or appetite for digital risk, but regional, governmental, and their own in-house IT security criteria. Example, we have clients who have installed smart devices, IoT devices in their building, but they cannot attach them to the existing network infrastructure due to security constraints. So if you're designing a smart building, IT absolutely needs to be at the table and part of the discussion. Another thing to consider is who will own the system or solution, or is there a formal handover? Does the client want a managed solution, or does the client want to manage the solution? Who, what, where, and how? We ask these questions a lot, but what type of devices or systems are we actually including? Out of the buffet of known options and services, which does the client really want to include? What type of reporting above and beyond basic systems performance, projections, is the client and all the various stakeholders need? I think Bill covered this and saw it to a degree as well, is that there are multiple informational needs in every organization, and being able to account for all of them from the beginning is certainly the more efficient route, and will also tell you what type of data it is that you need. Which brings us to, where are you getting your data, and what state is that data in? Keep in mind that I've already alluded to a potential issue with data normalization and curation, but again, also, how accessible is it? Do they own, lease, or some combination of the two? Are they working with a facility management company or a controls company, like some of those that Bill has just mentioned? In some instances, it's most times partnership is very, very easy, but again, to Bill's point, there are multiple levels or steps, if you will, to the digital twin adoption or evolution process. So those handshakes will become very, very critical, and those players need to be included in the conversation as well. And we found digital twin or not to digital twin is often the question. So after answering a lot of these questions that I've already posed, it's altogether possible that you or your client may not actually want a digital twin. Maybe they're just not ready for that type of journey, and instead are more interested in some assistance with some data architecture, trying to build that plan to digital twinning. And they need some curation and maybe a custom BI interface, which either you or they will ultimately manage. And at the end of the day, whatever solution it is or whatever path it is that they may be on, you need to tailor it to meet with their needs. So we know, and our clients know, that data and the ability to leverage it is going to be the competitive advantage, regardless of the industry. And this is becoming more and more so. Yet, while we all know this, the sheer volume of siloed and often inconsistent data can be more than a little bit daunting. It's kind of like that project, that you really, really need to do, but you find every excuse, task, whatever, to completely and totally avoid it. Like, hey, friend, you want help moving? Sweet, I'm totally in. Said nobody ever, unless they're trying to tackle this one. So unfortunately, much like sorting socks, pulling weeds, or even doing taxes, which most of us should have done already, time will not make this go away, and the challenges will continue to compound, and the costs and opportunity costs will as well. So to those that currently face this seemingly arduous task, I would challenge you and ask, if not now, when? And finally, given all that we've discussed today, I think that for most, as Bill's already alluded to, there are multiple steps on this journey. Not everybody's path will be the same because we are in the beginning. And so ultimately, you have to decide what makes the most sense for you and for your clients. And I think there are a number of different options or alternatives out there. Make, buy, or partner. There is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. It's whatever best meets with yours or your client's needs. And that is what I have for the day. Questions?
Great. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Another question came in. When your clients ask for digital twins, and I will get back to each of you and ask you the precursor question because I'm a survey guy by nature. And the precursor question is, how often are people literally asking you? But Sarah clearly is driving this a lot for Microsoft as an owner. When your clients ask for digital twins, is it usually part of the contract deliverables, or is it structured as an additional service beyond what they're already contracting you for? How is that actually done contractually and in terms of the initial ask from a client?
I can feel this from our perspective is the number of clients that are specifically asking for this as part of scope is super small. It's really, really small.
One?
Like statistically, less than 1%.
Okay, nobody.
It's close to zero, right? Yeah. But that being said, the conversation around digital twin is actually fairly high, right? Because there is enough buzz in the industry that owners and operators understand these kinds of things. It's just that from a designer's perspective, they already have facilities management solutions because they need them. And so the questions are more about ongoing conversations about, hey, how do we join forces and not make the design efforts as wasteful if the owner already has an existing FM solution, right? And those kinds of things. But there are other clients that are actually very interested in the idea of digital twin and everything that it promises. And it's sort of our job to sort of set expectations a little bit about the true capabilities, right now and what we predict they'll be in 3 to 5 years, so that they can set their own expectations. And then I think the most interesting part of that question, though, is about whether this is additional services or part of what you do. My position on that is this is not just additional services. This is a completely different revenue stream. And that's the way I believe that the industry needs to look at that. From a business perspective, I think we all we like the idea that we like telling that story, right? This is just the way we work, as architects and those kinds of things. But in my view, that is that's a terrible mistake, right? It leaves a lot of money on the table because there is extreme value in all of this, and if we're not aligning, our business models, right, around this big value, it's an existential mistake, right? And so, once you go down that path of charging something, no matter what your industry is, far below what it's actually worth, you never get that back. And so, I think it's a great conversation. We're right in the beginnings of those things. And in the conversations with owners as we mature as to what that actually looks like. I can tell you, Sarah, you mentioned that idea that maybe the owner isn't necessarily up for like the full digital twin kind of effort, but they are also very interested in understanding how to be future prepared from a data architecture, engineering and transformation perspective, and that is work that we're doing. So in a way, it's very related, even though it's not specifically digital twin.
Sarah, your perspective?
It's much the same as Bill's. I mean, the reality is that we do have plenty of clients that understand what digital twins can offer in the future, but I think they're also very self-aware. They know that there's a lot of heavy lifting to do on the other side, and I think a lot of people try and struggle with where to begin, right? It's kind of like when we make any major leap in technology, you have to decide where that demarcation point is. Where are you going to get started? Because you can't possibly do it all. That's what I meant by not eating the elephant in one bite or trying to tackle it all at once. You simply can't. It's impossible. And I agree with Bill. You know, more often than not, our clients come in and they either want help to prepare a current project or a specific facility to be digital twin ready. So they want somebody to come in and consult with them, understand what are the things that they need to build, so planning with the end in mind. And they need that consultation, somebody to take a look at what types of data they're going to need access to in order to be able to answer those questions, and then work with them on solutions architecture and data architecture. But then on the other side of it, we've had plenty of clients come in that they want everything. And at the end of the day, what they're really looking for, maybe not even necessarily buildings performance analytics, but more from the master planning perspective, especially coming out of the pandemic, right? We have all this real estate, we have mixed use, we have a combination of owned and leased space. We know, like, for example, with a healthcare client, that elder care and pediatric care are going to be on the rise. Do we have enough space in order to be able to accommodate our anticipated plans and industry projections, or could we be better using our space? And this sounds terrible when you're talking about humans, but seriously looking at throughput. And that could be anything, right? You're talking academia, you're talking airports, and being able to leverage that very same data that you've been amassing and some of the stuff that Bill's been talking about too, when it comes to people tracking and impact and environment. To go through and do that kind of assessment. Maybe the challenge isn't that they need more space, it's that they could be using it better. And so I think, like I said, and like very much what Bill said, it's understanding what are those immediate, those short-term and long-term needs for every single client, and then really being that partner in the process and trying to work with industry providers, other partners, to then develop the overall plan to help them get to where they need to be.
All right, Sala, what's your perspective on terms of engaging people to actually do this for Microsoft?
Yeah, so overall, the digital twins, it's an emerging methodology, an emerging technology. The Digital Twin Consortium was established less than a year ago. So now we are having the industry-wide discussions of how can we actually create the digital twins. So there's a big lift that needs to happen at the real estate owner side and on the operator side that are not necessarily the real estate owner organization, but vendor, the integrator that is providing the services for the owner. And there's a lot of work that needs to be going into the IT structures and IT management, that the legacy systems can be integrated with the digital twin solutions. There might be systems that are not cloud-based, that are on-prem. So there's a big lift for creating those links and those integrations. There needs to be more clarity on how the smart environments are plugged into digital twins versus legacy portfolios that are not ever designed or built as smart environments, but just as concrete boxes or concrete and steel regular houses that don't have the embedded technology to even monitor the technical performance or the social performance of those environments. So there is a big curve for building up the readiness amongst organizations, educating a lot of people, and training those that are then operationalizing digital twins. Otherwise, it will remain as a veneer for something that already exists, increasing the cost, and people wondering, why did we ever adopt to this? So just to have that transparent discussion of which legacy systems can be already retired and then digitized using digital twins. So as a poor analogy is that back in the day, we had our CD players, we had our cameras, we had our phones, all these things separate. Now everyone has a smartphone that has those capabilities, and it's the same kind of digital transformation with digital twins, that there's a lot of legacy that can be retired as an individual system and then create it as a capability in a digital twin. So it's a big journey ahead, and that's why we're not seeing full-blooded digital twins in the industry yet. Those are coming. The project lead times are so long that even if the owners are now waking up to digital twins and asking for them, commissioning them, the designers and engineers are still having the conversations that how should they actually deliver the digital twins for the owners.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned smartphones. That is actually a really good analogy. All the studies are showing that the telephone aspect of smartphones is by far the least used, right? But we still call them smartphones. And I think you've touched on something we can give a name to here, which would be retro twinning of all of our existing facilities out there, of which there are tens of millions, right? And so there's a whole business that talk about new streams of revenue, right? We all have clients with tons of existing buildings. I think we're onto some interesting stuff here. A question came in, and I think to an extent, it may reflect what the more traditional view of a digital twin is, as opposed to what Bill helped us think about, which is also has this whole human element to it. But what kind of buildings or infrastructure usually get the digital twin treatment? Are they typically large buildings with lots of capital-intensive equipment, like a power plant or a hospital? Bill, I'm going to toss that back to you because I think you've really helped us understand that there's so much more that we can do with the digital twin. Not that that isn't important.
Yeah, it's a great question, to preface that, we are in early days, right? So I would say that the more industrial the application, so things like the water treatment facilities, utility type, anything dealing with infrastructure that also has a component, some sort of architectural component, because of the nature of that, of the critical nature of that that industry. They're already censoring up, right? So we've been seeing this for a while in terms of the actual infrastructure work itself, and so the rest of it kind of lends itself well. Healthcare is, of course, a really sort of precise building typology where environmental conditions are really, really critical. And so that is a likely area where that's going to rise. But we're also seeing, and have been seeing for many years now, that the sort of human component, right? So because of the nature of healthcare and the regulation and safety and those kinds of things around employment, it's very easy to censor up your human capital, right? All the people and understand how things are working. To impact design, right? So is it, do nursing stations really have the full view that we say that they do? And right. Can someone get a crash cart from A to B really, really in time? And those kinds of things. So those are the primary areas. But if we, it's sort of in generalities. But if we pick apart certain things, right? If we talk about security, both in camera and space access, federal government work has always been using this, and so as that technology continues to improve, their ability to sift through and mine and understand the data also gets better. So that's, if you're doing that kind of work, it's really helpful to have a group like what we have, like our global technologies studio, to help provide those kinds of consulting and designs. I would say that those are the major things, but like the big opportunity is around the rest of the really kind of commercialized things, like around hospitality, around shopping and retail, specifically in retail, right? Like being able to better understand not just the environmental performance, that is a factor, right? Like the major brands are all moving in that direction, that they want to be a responsible citizen, right, within the planet when it comes to climate change and sustainability. But this other aspect of really using the twin and all of its digital sort of inputs to better understand their customer when they're actually shopping, right? It's basically translating everything, all the work that Google and Amazon has done, both about browsing, shopping, and buying, right? Because they're three different things, right? Being able to translate that to a physical space, it's like a whole wide open territory. And what we found is like it doesn't matter if you're a super high luxury brand like like Tiffany's or Prada or Burberry, or if you're there doesn't seem to be more or less of an appetite. I would say the bigger retailers are better positioned, right, because they have a huge fleet of big stores, those kinds of things where they're able to do do that kind of work. But it's all emerging. And so I would say right now at this moment, if you're whatever practice areas that your firm focuses on, it's all ripe right now. This is a really good time to sort of start thinking in these terms.
Yeah, Sarah, what's the Stantec perspective on where this applies, how it applies?
I think you can right size it more than you could a fast food meal. I mean, I think Bill really covered it earlier, which is the reality is you can take a segment of a building all the way up to an entire city if you really want to. I mean, the technology is certainly evolving, but I think the bigger challenges are actually the democratization of data, which Saul already alluded to. It'd be nice if all data were within reason. Come on now. But a lot of the building's performance data and things like that, it'd be nice if we all had access to them. But the reality is that due to industry things, contracts, technology, etc., all of our data is siloed. And the reality is we're not going to publish that information, make it readily available for everybody so that we can all leverage it to its fullest, right? And so that's your bigger challenge. And I like what Bill said. I mean, we've been doing the same as well, where I think anybody who's beginning to embark on this journey, you don't have to try and tackle an entire building or a city or even an entire campus or whatever. It can be as small as you want. Take a segment of a floor or a floor, like Bill's already shown in his example, and do something similar. Take a look at the concentration of individuals in a single space. Maybe take a look at not only like he has with people's activity and their health, and then do a deeper study on why it is that they're doing what they're doing. Or you could take a look at how their activity and the concentration or even the noise of an individual then impacts and could react with your other building systems. So it can kind of be whatever you want it to be, and that's the beauty of data, and that's why it's really hard to pinpoint specific examples, which you well know, Steve, because you're actually more immersed in that than I think any of us on a day-to-day basis. The wonderful thing about data is that you can leverage it in nearly any way possible. What we're talking about with digital twins is purely the visualization and the ability to then process and then leverage it, right? And so I think that's where it gets far more interesting. Digital twins for me are a means to an end. It's all the things that we can do with that data after the fact that are far more interesting to giant nerds like me. Like buildings performance analysis, yeah, that's awesome. But I'm interested in automating master planning, doing that situational analysis and taking a look at how it is that people are interacting with and how they're leveraging their space and whether or not they could be doing with less, right? Certainly as doing a post-pandemic response. So, I mean, the best part about this whole journey and this process is that there isn't a right answer. You can start anywhere with nearly anything and study almost anything that you want. It's a matter of having the conversation and then planning with the end in mind. I mean, so like I said, it seems really simple, but it's not easy figuring out where you want to start and what questions you really want to have answered. And then getting that data, well, that's where all the funsies begins.
Because, Bill already the editing is the most important part, because you could do almost anything. The point is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. What should you do to really provide the highest level of value, right, to whoever it's going to be on that consuming end, and to the point that you made, you really better look at all the key stakeholders that may want to have a piece of this and make sure that they are part of that discussion when you begin. So you're involved with now an industry-wide consortium that's looking at how to do this. I mean, how broadly is that group looking at this? Are you looking at industrial production factories? Are you looking at how broadly are we trying to make this apply right now?
Yeah, a good question. We are looking at as broadly as possible, deep diving into the business cases and into the use cases, trying to understand the data streams and the taxonomies and the whole thing, so that we are not only focusing on developing proprietary technology, but really understanding that where is that technology going to be applied, who are going to be the end users. And then when thinking about who are probably the first ones to go are mission critical real estate and infrastructure owners, because with those projects, if a facility goes down, it's costing arm and leg, and it has a big impact on the customers of the customers, etc. And then when thinking about healthcare or residential, like Sarah said, senior housing, and how to keep people living in their own homes longer, and not have people move into rest homes or nursing homes until they can't live in home conditions. That also has a financial implication into why digital twins could really help support the people, the end users, and that way balance where people actually live, where they work, how the built environment is there to support the end users overall. So there are a lot of applications, and depending on, are you looking at the benefits of digital twins from the perspective of how is it making lives easier for the people, or are you looking into the more of the technical performance and the financial performance of different facilities and buildings? There's a lot to kind of consider, but those are the perspectives that I see as the first goers.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, as a data communicator, I begin to think of this, you know, XY axis, and where is this digital twin going to fall on the sort of the human side versus the technical performance side? And you know, they're going to be all over that grid of different sizes and different flavors. This is really going to be fun as we go forward. A question came in, which is I think worth discussing here. We're talking a lot about design. We're talking a lot about operations and maintenance. Where does the GC play in this? All right. I think this probably came from a GC.
Well, I can jump in, and it's a world of opportunity, right? I mean, so if we look at like the current AEC pie, right, and where we're all engineers, architects, and builders all kind of fit. It's easy to say like, oh, well, you know, now we introduce something into this pie, and maybe it flexes, you know, all the competing team members, you know, for parts of that. I tend to look at it a little differently. I really tend to look at this is a separate pie, right? And that the work that's being done, all the information and everything that's being authored in our traditional pie is actually feeding this other pie, right? So the more the ways that we are structured and disciplined in the ways that we work traditionally, the bigger that pie gets, right? And so, and across everyone, and it's going to require all entities to work towards that end. And the benefit to everybody is that everybody gets more value, right? The owners have more value because the assets themselves are being not only managed in a more sophisticated way, but the whole planning around their assets and how it fits in with their business models are being better informed, right? Not just around a single building, but around a fleet of buildings in multiple cities in their own environments. So when it comes to like the role of the contractor, like all things, it's as much or as little as you have appetite for, right? And so one of the challenges we currently have right now with BIM, right, is that architects and engineers carry models up to a certain LOD, you know, depending on what you've agreed to, but it's really to illustrate design intent, right? Until regulations change, you know, it's still going to be our deliverables are still predicated on drawings and project manuals, but we know that's evolving, right? And so right now contractors are taking that extra step, right, and then either building models in parallel to meet their own demands, and by the time they get done, they're much better situated in terms of being closer to the actual digital representation. So I think that the opportunity to it's not like an either or, right? Like all things, I think that as engineers and designers start feeding and understanding what the actual insight from digital twin is, that we build these pipelines and pathways so that it's easier for either contractors to translate that information in their own models, or we actually work collaboratively, right, and start building out the models themselves in a more sophisticated way. And when I say model, I don't mean like a Revit model. I mean the model itself of all the data, right? And the geometry is just sort of one piece of it. And so when we kind of separate those ideas out, then it becomes more provocative about what's the most meaningful and valuable part that a contractor does versus an engineer versus a designer. And so we can really target and cleave out our services and the sort of fidelity around the information and data to reflect that. So yeah, it's not, to me, it's an industry thing, right?
Right, there's room in the tent for everybody. Yeah, I think we also want to bring trade contractors into the tent because
absolutely,
an awful lot of them, half their revenue comes from service. They're right in that facility constantly, right? And especially on the technical performance side, they're key players. And so they should be welcome in the tent too. Sarah, in terms of how Stantec is dealing with it, are you engaging construction professionals in any way along the course of it?
Yeah, I mean, we play multiple roles, and it kind of depends on the project and the client that we happen to be working with. So because we are an integrated AE firm, that means that we could either be prime on the project, we could work as a sub-consultant to a contractor, kind of depends on what we're talking about. So there's always opportunity to take the construction knowledge and build it into the beginning as much as humanly possible, right? That's the value proposition, is making sure that you're trying to design things once, and that ultimately at the end of the day, whatever it is that we hand our clients is as close to accurate as humanly possible, not just design intent. And so, yes, absolutely, we engage with contractors on a day-to-day basis, trying to not only improve our internal processes, but make sure that we pass that value proposition on to our clients. And I think that's even more critical with digital twins. I agree with Bill. The thing that we see on the screen and that we interact with on a day-to-day basis is important from a coordination perspective, orientation, et cetera, but it's the data behind it that's really the most powerful. It's just that we have a different perspective because of the traditional design, delivery, and construction process. And then when it comes to GCs, I agree with Bill on that too. I kind of wanted to tag on that in support of what he said, is that I think there's an incredible opportunity here for GCs because of their role on projects. Engineers tend to come to the party a little bit later. Architects are on the project for a while, depending on the type of project. So the opportunity to have that conversation and where an owner can lean in and engage is really with the GCs and the architects to begin with, because again, it's planning with the end in mind and setting the expectation of what it is that you're going to use this data for at the end of the day. More often than not, we have clients who for the longest time have insisted upon that 2D geometry. So even if your contractor goes through and builds out an incredibly detailed model with all of the information, whether it's BIM or no, embedded in it, that gets discarded. It goes completely unused. And so the reality is that they get back design intent, which is not going to get them to where they need to be. And unfortunately, that means that when GC, it doesn't really matter who's engaged, a Unity or an Unreal, the information that they get is kind of useless. I don't really want to say that because that sounds bad.
Just a little thin, perhaps. Yeah.
It could be fortified a little bit, but along with going through and taking a look at not only the geometry and the documentation that exists so that you can actually create the digital twin, you have to go through and deal with the data and then the reconciliation of that. I mean, we've been in instances, frankly, where we're in coordination with facilities management. They have data and no device, and device and no data. And we didn't know that until we started digging into it. So I think there's a wealth of opportunity. This is really early in the journey. I think anybody could be a player. It's a matter of who dives in first and figures these things out. And I do agree that we can share information amongst each other. I think that there's an opportunity for us all to benefit. Now, the reality of that happening will be a little bit more interesting, won't it?
Right. I mean, I could argue from a contractor's viewpoint, hey, I'm building the building. I should be building this digital model of it to turn over to. Hey, this is what I do. I build, right?
IPD was the
So
idea that
it'll be interesting going forward.
right?
Yeah.
IPD introduced the idea that we would all work together towards a collective end.
Right.
Maybe we should revive some of that, or increase that awareness.
And certainly incorporate this as part of that collective thinking. So, are there contractors involved in the industry-wide consortium that you're involved with?
Yeah, there are a variety of different stakeholders from the industry involved, and something that has been discussed with the contractors is the importance of trades, like you mentioned, that there's a lot of opportunity for transferring the lessons learned between the different stakeholders and thinking about it as a construction manager or general contractor as the orchestra leader, if using the analogy of a symphony orchestra, that they might not be the subject matter expert in specifics, but they are leading the pack and making sure that the real estate owner investor at the end of the day gets what they invested in. But then using the digital twins, that might be an opportunity for the owner organization to get involved and have their facility management teams learn from the trade partners, build up their readiness for operating and maintaining the smart environments. Because if people have the expectation that we're going to deliver smart environments and maintain and repair and operate them as we did the buildings that were not designed and engineered to be smart, I think we are up against that big failure. And that's the opportunity to digitally transform the industry. That how do we actually support the learning of everyone on board and in the industry, and especially thinking about how much there is now workforce maturing in the built environment industry, and how long the careers are with the facility managers and people in the operations side currently doing their work. How can we ensure that when they retire, their knowledge doesn't retire with them, but we can start training the next generation of facility managers and operators and discover new types of roles that might not exist, but will emerge as smart environments become more of the norm, and collaborate with the schools and the educational organizations, bring in the trade partners, don't leave them behind, and really use the digital twins for more of that open collaboration and discussion.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we're getting near the end time, and so I want to sort of close on these comments. I think this has been a terrific discussion. I think we have expanded and focused at the same time on the potential power of the digital twin. My perspective of having now studied tech in this industry for almost 2 decades is that I think we're about a third of the way through a complete gut and redo of this entire industry, so it will be really basically unrecognizable by the time we're at the other end of it. This is going to be a really critical aspect of that, right? And so I'm very happy that we're talking about the people aspect, and it's not just about it's hardly about a tech at all. Tech is in the background here. Really, this is about how human beings engage with our built environment more efficiently and more effectively, more comfortably, more sustainably, more economically, and all that stuff. I love all the aspects about this, because I think the first half of what we've gone through here in terms of tech coming into this industry has been about fixing more of the dumb stuff, right? Getting us from subpar performance, approaching back to like, okay, this is sort of like what we actually thought we'd do on day one, right? Now we're actually starting to get better, right? I mean, when you're able to be tracking how your buildings are being used after you designed them, right? When you can actually see what we thought was really going to make less congestion around a nursing station, it worked. Look at that. Just by angling the corners and corridors. Oh my God, look at it really works, right? We have more science behind design. And that's just going to keep flowing all the way down and through, right? This is just going to be great for everybody. I'm very excited about it.